Act 2 of Pride and Prejudice, a play, by Mary Keith Medbery Macakaye. The conservatory or orangery at Netherfield. On one side an archway, approached by 2 or 3 steps and hung with curtains, separates the orangery from the ballroom. On the opposite side is a smaller archway with curtains which are looped back, giving a glimpse of the drawing-room beyond. There is another door on the right. Bingley is discovered directing 2 footmen, who are putting a bench in place. Darcy stands watching them.
A little more to the right, Martin. That will do. Push those lights farther back, behind the trees. Yes, that is better.
Looking about him.
I think that is all. You may go.
The men leave the room.
Well, Darcy, do you approve of the arrangements? Have you anything to suggest? Any criticisms?
I have no criticisms for the arrangements.
But you have for the ball. Yes, I know. Still, I was really obliged to keep my promise.
I am glad to find that a promise is with you an obligation.
Oh, come, Darcy, I understand. Set your mind at rest. I'm going to London with you, although I must say I do not see the necessity for it. I think you are exaggerating the effect of any small attention of mine toward Miss Bennet. However, we will cling together, and fly a common danger.
Common danger?
Yes, common danger. I too have eyes. Where will you match the wit and vivacity of Miss Elizabeth Bennet?
She is indeed charming, and I admit that were it not for the inferiority of her connections, I might be in some danger. But they form, for me, an insurmountable barrier against any possible peril.
Love laughs at bars, Darcy.
Darcy looks annoyed.
No, I won't. It really is not fair, since it is my fault. You would never have been put to the test if you hadn't been so good as to stay on here with me after that.
Stopping suddenly, and with an entire change from his former bantering tone, he says in a hesitating manner,
Darcy, do you really think you should be silent about Wickham?
Decidedly. I do not choose to lay my private affairs before the world.
But the fellow is sailing under false colours. You do not know what the result may be. I really must speak of this again, Darcy, even at the risk of offending you.
Darcy makes an impatient gesture.
I am truly concerned at the foothold this rascal has already gained in the Bennet family. What he has failed to accomplish once, he may succeed in again. These young ladies have no brother to defend them.
Neither have they the wealth to excite Wickham's cupidity. At any rate, I do not wish to be the one to enlighten the neighbourhood. Besides, I understand that he has left Meryton.
Even so,
He is interrupted by Miss Bingley, who enters gaily from the drawing-room.
Ah, here you are.
To Darcy.
Will you be so kind?
She holds out her arm for him to clasp her bracelet.
Your sister Georgiana should be here, Mr. Darcy.
To her brother.
Charles, you should have insisted on her coming.
I am not in the habit of insisting with Darcy.
Laughingly.
Very true.
To Darcy, who has at length succeeded in fastening the bracelet.
Thank you.
Looking about her.
It is vastly pretty, Charles, but I am much mistaken if there are not some among us to whom a ball will be rather a punishment than a pleasure.
If you mean Darcy, he may go to bed if he pleases, before it begins.
But, Charles, it would certainly be more rational if conversation instead of dancing were made the order of the day.
Much more rational, my dear Caroline, but it would not be near so much like a ball.
Entering to Mr. Bingley.
Several of the carriages have arrived, sir, and the guests will soon be entering the ballroom.
To the footmen.
Very well.
To Miss Bingley.
Come, Caroline, we must be at our post. We will leave Darcy to make up his mind whether he will join us later.
Bingley and his sister disappear through the archway leading to the ballroom. Darcy does not follow them, but walks thoughtfully up and down the room. The sound of a voice is heard announcing,
Mrs. Long, the Miss Longs.
A pause.
Colonel Foster and Mr. Denny.
A pause.
Mr. and Mrs. Golding.
A pause.
Mrs. Bennet, the Miss Bennets.
Darcy stops in his walk and goes towards the ballroom archway. Then he walks once more up and down.
Mrs. King, Miss King.
Darcy again moves towards the ballroom. He lifts the curtain, hesitates, looks in, then disappears.
Sir William and Lady Lucas, Miss Lucas, Mr. Robinson.
The music now begins. The stage is left empty. After a short pause, Elizabeth and Charlotte appear between the curtains of the ballroom archway. Peeps in, then enters.
Isn't this pretty? Come in here for a moment, Eliza. I want to tell you something.
Following her.
Why did I promise to dance with Mr. Darcy just now? Why did I not have more presence of mind?
They sit on the bench together while they talk. The guests at the back pass to and from the drawing-room and the ballroom, and the sound of the music is heard faintly.
I dare say you will find him very agreeable.
Heaven forbid! That would be the greatest misfortune of all. To find a man agreeable whom one is determined to hate. Do not wish me such an evil.
I wouldn't be a simpleton, Eliza. You are angry because Wickham is not here. But I wouldn't allow my fancy for him to make me unpleasant in the eyes of a man of 10 times his consequence.
My fancy for Wickham, as you choose to call it, is simply my sympathy for a most ill-used man, also the relief of meeting with good manners and a good understanding after the insufferable pride of Mr. Darcy, and the stupid pomposity of that dreadful Mr. Collins.
Charlotte starts.
Oh, my dear Charlotte, I have never thanked you half enough for helping us to endure that man. It was so good-natured in you to sacrifice yourself by listening to those interminable speeches of his. I am more obliged to you than I can express. But oh, what a relief it is to know that he is really gone.
Who has listened to this tirade in increasing embarrassment.
Oh, don't, Eliza. You are making it so terribly hard for me. But I must tell you, I am engaged to Mr. Collins.
Elizabeth is stupefied with surprise, and looks at Charlotte for a moment in silent and incredulous amazement. Then, with difficulty, she speaks.
Engaged? Engaged to Mr. Collins? Oh, my dear Charlotte, impossible! You are joking.
No, indeed, Eliza. I am in most serious earnest. Why should you be so surprised? Do you think it incredible that Mr. Collins should be able to procure any woman's good opinion because he was not so happy as to succeed with you?
Oh, no, of course not. And you must forgive all I have just said. I couldn't possibly have imagined.
No, Eliza, indeed you could not.
She puts her hand on Elizabeth's shoulder.
And we shall be friends still?
Why, of course, dear Charlotte. It was only the surprise. You know how fond I am of you. You know I wish you all imaginable happiness.
Yes, I am sure of it. You must be surprised, very much surprised, so lately as Mr. Collins was wishing to marry you. But, dear Eliza, when you have had time to think it all over, I hope you will be satisfied with what I have done. I am not romantic. I ask only a comfortable home, and considering Mr. Collins' situation in life, I am convinced that my chance of happiness with him is as fair as most people can boast on entering the marriage state.
Undoubtedly.
Looking at Elizabeth affectionately and wistfully.
And you will come to visit me sometimes. I could not bear to lose you, Eliza.
Surely, Charlotte.
Looking up and patting Charlotte's hand.
We are to be cousins, you know.
Why, so we are.
Colonel Forster comes from the ballroom. Lydia and Denny enter from the drawing-room. Hurriedly going to Charlotte.
I am to have the honour of this reel, I believe, Miss Lucas.
Oh, yes, Colonel Forster.
She goes out with Forster, leaving Elizabeth alone, still seated. Lydia and Denny approach Elizabeth.
I think we are being treated abominably ill, Lizzie. It seems that Mr. Wickham has gone off on business somewhere, so he will not be here at all.
Lydia looks off towards the ballroom. Aside to Elizabeth significantly.
I do not imagine his business would have called him away just now if he had not wished to avoid a certain gentleman.
Suddenly.
Why, Mr. Denny, I do believe the reel is half over. I dearly love a reel. We shall miss it altogether. Come.
She drags Denny off. Alone.
Well, well. The world is surely upside down. Charlotte and Collins. What a match.
Approaching from the ballroom.
Do you not feel a great inclination, Miss Bennet, to seize such an opportunity of dancing a reel?
Elizabeth makes no answer.
Do you not enjoy the reel, Miss Bennet?
Looking up.
Oh, I heard you before, but I could not immediately determine what to say in reply. You wanted me, I know, to say yes, that you might have the pleasure of despising my taste, but I always delight in overthrowing that kind of scheme. I have therefore made up my mind to tell you that I do not want to dance a reel at all, and now despise me if you dare.
Smiling.
I do not dare.
Miss Bingley enters from the ballroom with an officer. They talk together. Entering from the ballroom and looking about him, sees Elizabeth and comes to her.
May I have the honour, Miss Bennet?
I do not dance the reel, Colonel Forster.
Oh, the reel is over. This is our dance.
She goes off with Colonel Forster. Darcy remains where Elizabeth leaves him and watches her till she disappears into the ballroom. The officer bows and leaves Miss Bingley. Approaching Darcy.
I can guess the subject of your reverie.
I should imagine not.
You are considering how insufferable it would be to pass many evenings in such society. Indeed, I'm quite of your opinion. I was never more annoyed. The insipidity and yet the noise, the nothingness and yet the self-importance of all these people. What would I give to hear your strictures in them?
Your conjecture is totally wrong. I assure you my mind was more agreeably engaged. I was meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow.
Looking at him very meaningfully and sweetly, speaks with coquetry.
Indeed. And will not you tell me what lady has the credit in inspiring such reflections?
With great intepidity.
Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
Taken aback.
Miss Elizabeth Bennet! I'm astonished. How long has she been such a favourite? Pray when I'm to wish you joy.
That is exactly the question which I expected you to ask. A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love, from love to matrimony, in a moment. I knew you would be wishing me joy.
Nay, if you're so serious about it, I shall consider the matter as absolutely settled. You will have a charming mother-in-law. Of course you'll always be at Pemberley with you. Perhaps you might give a few hints as to the advantage of holding her tongue.
Thank you. Have you anything else to propose for my domestic felicity?
Oh, yes. Let a portrait of your uncle the attorney be placed next to your great-uncle the judge. They aren't the same profession, you know, only in different lines. As for your Elizabeth's picture, you must not attempt to have it taken, for what painter could do justice to those beautiful eyes?
It would not be easy, indeed, to catch their expression, but their colour and shape, and the eyelashes, so remarkably fine, might be copied.
Oh, I fear not.
Elizabeth and Colonel Forster, with others, enter from the ballroom. Miss Bennet with Lady Lucas from the drawing-room.
Here comes the fair one.
Seen Mrs. Bennet.
And mamma-in-law as well. I will not intrude in a family party.
She goes off laughing and mingles with the guests. Colonel Forster bows and leaves Elizabeth with her mother. Bingley enters with Jane from the drawing-room. He sees Darcy, who is standing where Mrs. Bingley left him, and comes to him.
I thought this next dance was the one you liked so much, Darcy. Let me find you a partner.
Starting, as if in a reverie.
So it is. Thank you, I have a partner.
He goes to Elizabeth, bows, and they go into the ballroom together. Mrs. Bennet and Mrs. Long follow them. Looking after Darcy with a smile, turns to Jane.
You must be tired, Miss Bennet. I propose that we sit quietly through this dance. Do you agree?
Yes, indeed.
She sits on the bench.
It will be very pleasant.
Looking about her.
How very prettily you have arranged all the rooms, Mr. Bingley.
I'm so glad you think so. I feared they were rather inconvenient for so large a party.
Oh, I find them delightful.
You are always charitable, Miss Bennet. It seems to me you always manage to see the best side of everything. I never knew you to say an ill word about a person or a place.
Smiling.
Oh, I fear that is not quite exact. I only try to see things in their best light, perhaps.
That is just it. The rest of us rarely try to see things in that way. So you see, I have proved my case. You are too amiable.
Not for tonight, Mr. Bingley. Everybody is of one mind tonight. There is but one point of view.
You are giving nothing but pleasure.
I wish it were so, but, dear Miss Bennet, I wish to tell you, I must tell you.
He's interrupted by the people coming in again from the dance. Darcy and Elizabeth enter with Sir William, Lucas, and others. Bingley and Jane rise from their seats and walk slowly towards the back of the room. Darcy escorts Elizabeth to a seat and stands by her. Both are silent for a moment.
It is your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy. I talked about the dance, and you ought to make some kind of remark on the size of the rooms, or the number of couples.
Smiling.
I assure you I will say whatever you wish.
Very well, that reply will do for the present. Perhaps by and by I may observe that private balls are much pleasanter than public ones.
Do you talk by rule, then?
Sometimes. One must speak a little, as you know, and yet for the advantage of some, conversation ought to be so arranged that they may have the trouble of saying as little as possible.
Are you consulting your own feelings in the present case, or do you imagine that you are gratifying mine?
Both. For I have always seen a great similarity in the turn of our minds. We are each of an unsocial, taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak unless we expect to say something that will amaze the whole room, and be handed down to posterity with all the éclat of a proverb.
This is no very striking resemblance of your own character, I am sure. How near it may be to mine, I cannot pretend to say. You think it a faithful portrait, undoubtedly.
I shall not decide on my own performance.
There is a short silence. Then, as if with an effort, Elizabeth speaks.
I am surprised not to see Mr. Wickham here to-night. I find that he is a great favourite with the officers. He has made many friends among them.
With great hauteur.
Mr. Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as may ensure his making friends. Whether he may be equally capable of retaining them is less certain.
He has been so unlucky as to lose your friendship, and in a manner which he is likely to suffer from all his life.
They both are silent. Coming up to them all urgently in smiles.
What a charming amusement for young people this dancing is, Mr. Darcy. I consider it one of the first refinements of Polish societies.
Certainly, sir, and it has the advantage also of being in vogue amongst the less polished societies of the world. Every savage can dance.
Smiling.
Do you often dance at Sir James's?
Never, sir.
You have a house in town, I conclude.
Mr. Darcy bows, but does not speak.
I had once some thoughts of fixing in town myself, but did not feel quite certain that the air of London would agree with Lady Lucas.
Darcy bows in silence again. Elizabeth is amused.
But I must not further interrupt you, sir. I only wish to tell you once more how highly gratified I have been by your superior dancing. Allow me also to say that your fair partner does not disgrace you. It is a great pleasure to see you together. I must hope, too, to have this pleasure often repeated, especially when a certain desirable event, my dear Miss Eliza.
Glancing at Bingley and Jane, who are talking earnestly together at the back of the scene.
Shall take place. What congratulations will then flow in. But let me not interrupt you. You will not thank me, Mr. Darcy, for detaining you from the bewitching converse of that young lady, whose bright eyes are also upbraiding me.
Murmurs to himself.
So.
Looking earnestly at Bingley and Jane, he seems much impressed by what Sir William has said. Elizabeth notices this. Recovering himself, Darcy turns to her again.
Sir William's interruption has made me forget what we were talking of.
I do not think we were speaking at all. Sir William could not have interrupted any two people who had less to say for themselves. We have tried 2 or 3 subjects already without success, and what we are to talk of next I cannot imagine.
Smiling.
What think you of books?
Books? Oh, no. I am sure we never read the same, or not with the same feelings.
I am sorry you think so, but if that be the case, there can at least be no want of subject. We may compare our different opinions of them.
No, I cannot talk of books at a ball. My head is always full of something else.
The present always occupies you in such scenes, does it?
Yes, always. I remember hearing you once say, Mr. Darcy, that you hardly ever forgave, that your resentment, once created, was unappeasable. You were very cautious, I suppose, as to its being created.
I am.
And never allow yourself to be blinded by prejudice.
I hope not.
It is particularly incumbent on those who never change their opinion to be secure of judging properly at first.
May I ask to what these questions lead?
Merely to the illustration of your character. I am trying to make it out.
And what is your success?
Shaking her head.
I do not get on at all. I hear such different accounts of you as puzzle me exceedingly.
I can readily believe that reports may vary greatly with respect to me, and I could wish, Miss Bennet, that you were not to sketch my character at the present moment, as there is reason to fear that the performance would reflect no credit on either.
But if I do not take your likeness now, I may never have another opportunity.
I would by no means suspend any pleasure of yours.
Miss Bingley enters from the ballroom. She comes directly to Darcy and Elizabeth.
Oh, Mr. Darcy, would you be so good as to go to Charles? He wishes very much to consult you about some of the table arrangements. You will find him in the dining parlour. That is, if Miss Bennet will permit you.
Oh, certainly.
Darcy bows and goes out. To Elizabeth, after a moment's silence.
So, Miss Bennet, I hear that you were quite delighted with George Wickham. He must have told you all a pretty tale, as to Mrs. Darcy's using him ill. It is perfectly false. I do not know the particulars, but I do know that George Wickham has treated Mr. Darcy in a most infamous manner. His coming into the county at all is a most insolent thing. I feel very strongly on this point, Miss Bennet, as Mr. Darcy's interests are so intimately associated with our own.
She watches Elizabeth.
We hope Miss Georgiana Darcy may some day be my sister. My brother admires her greatly.
Ah.
Yes, and therefore we resent this falsehood and this presumption on the part of George Wickham. But, really, considering his descent, we could not expect much better. He has evidently forgotten to tell you that he is just son of old Wickham, steward to the late Mr. Darcy.
His guilt and his descent appear by your account to be the same. I have heard you accuse him of nothing worse than of being the son of Mr. Darcy's steward, and of that I can assure you he informed me himself.
With a sneer.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Excuse my interference. It was kindly meant.
She goes out.
Insolent girl. You are much mistaken if you expect to influence me by such a paltry attack as this. I see nothing in it but your own wilful ignorance and the malice of Mr. Darcy.
Footmen now come in with small tables, which they place about the stage. Bingley comes in and directs them. Darcy follows him. To Elizabeth, Jane, his sister, and others who have entered.
I thought it would be pleasant to have some of the tables here.
To Jane.
We must have places together.
With some bustle, all seat themselves. At the table on one side are seated Darcy, Elizabeth, Bingley, and Jane. A little behind them are Miss Bingley with Colonel Forster, Charlotte Lucas with an officer. At the table on the opposite side is Mrs. Bennet with Sir William and Lady Lucas. Behind them are more tables at which other guests are seated. Entering with Denny, much excited, goes to Mrs. Bennet.
Mamma, have you heard the news? Mr. Denny has just told me that the regiment is to leave Meryton and go to Brighton. Good heavens! What is to become of us, mamma?
Sympathetically.
Are they really going? Well, my love, it is too bad. I know how you feel. I'm sure I cried for 2 days together when Colonel Miller's regiment went away, 25 years ago. I thought I should have broken my heart.
I am sure I shall break mine. Mamma, might we not all go to Brighton?
Oh, if we only could! But I fear your father will not hear of it.
Oh, papa is so disagreeable. I am sure a little sea-bathing would set me up for ever. Wouldn't it, Mr. Denny?
Surely, Miss Lydia. Oh, you must manage it in some way.
They move off and take their places at one of the tables. Looking after them.
Well, Lady Lucas, it is hard for a lively young girl like my Lydia to be cooped up in a place where there is so little going on. However,
looking at Bingley and Jane,
we are not likely to have it so very dull in the future.
In a loud whisper to Lady Lucas.
You know what I mean.
Nudging her and laughing.
Jane and Bingley.
Ah, indeed.
with importance in a still louder tone.
Oh, yes, it is quite settled. Such a charming young man, and Netherfield only 3 miles from Longbourn. And Jane's marrying will be a fine thing for my other girls. They will be sure to meet other rich men who will fall in love with them.
Who has heard the beginning of this conversation, makes a pretext to go to arrange her mother's scarf, and says in low tones,
"Oh, mamma, be careful, I beg. Mr. Darcy can hear you."
What is Mr. Darcy to me, pray, that I should be afraid of him? I am sure we owe him no such particular civility as to be obliged to say nothing he may not like to hear.
For heaven's sake, mamma, speak lower. What advantage can it be to you to offend Mr. Darcy? You will never recommend yourself to his friend by so doing.
That is enough, Lizzie. I think I can take care of myself. I never knew before that it was a crime to speak to one's friend about what everybody can see plainly enough, who has eyes in his head.
Turning to Sir William.
Did you, Sir William?
Smiling.
Our friends usually have very sharp eyes for what is going on, Mrs. Bennet.
Significantly.
I have indeed sometimes expected that you would observe what has been going on in our household of late.
Going on? What has been going on, Sir William?
With an important air.
It is only this, Mrs. Bennet, that Lady Lucas and myself have to ask your congratulations on our very great satisfaction in a recent engagement of our daughter Charlotte.
Charlotte? Engaged? Why, who in the world is going to marry her?
Sir William draws himself up with offended dignity. Lady Lucas bridles.
The gentleman whom my daughter has honoured with her hand is your husband's cousin, Mr. Collins.
Rising in rage and amazement.
Mr. Collins? Marry your Charlotte? Good Lord, Sir William, how can you tell such a story? Do you not know that Mr. Collins is going to marry my Lizzie? Or one of my other girls?
Well, really, Mrs. Bennet.
What I have told you is quite true. Nevertheless, Mrs. Bennet, the whole matter was settled before Mr. Collins returned to Hunsford. I am sorry we are not to receive your good wishes.
Oh, but you are, Sir William. Charlotte has already told me all about her engagement, and we shall be most happy to welcome her as a cousin.
Mollified and with gallantry.
Thank you, Miss Elizabeth. I am sure other congratulations will shortly be in order.
He glances significantly at Darcy. Elizabeth draws herself up. Sir William, smiling, makes a little bow, then turns to the table, where he and Lady Lucas busy themselves with their supper. To Elizabeth.
So Charlotte has told you, has she? I don't believe a word of it.
Oh, mamma.
I'm sure Mr. Collins has been taken in. Well, I trust they will never be happy together, and I hope the match will be broken off.
Mamma.
Turning on Elizabeth in a rage.
And you are the cause of this whole mischief, Lizzie. I think I have been barbarously used by you all.
While this conversation has been going on, the other guests have been taking their supper. Colonel Forster now rises with a glass of wine in his hand.
Ladies and gentlemen.
The buzz of conversation ceases.
Ladies and gentlemen, I should like to propose the health of Mr. Bingley.
Mr. Bingley.
Mr. Bingley.
Raising his glass.
To Mr. Bingley, may the pleasure which he has given us all tonight be but a foretaste of the future happiness which he will both receive and give in this community.
Mr. Bingley. Colonel Forster. Mr. Bingley.
Mr. Bingley. Mr. Bingley.
All drink as Bingley bows. Rising.
And may I be allowed to still further express the sentiments of this community by proposing another toast in which I am sure you will all join me with enthusiasm?
Raising his glass.
To the Master of Netherfield, may he retain that title from his present fortunate youth to his future green and honoured old age.
Drinking.
Mr. Bingley. Sir William. Mr. Bingley.
Rising.
Ladies and gentlemen, friends.
Hear, hear.
I really cannot tell you how much I am touched by the very kind words of Colonel Forster and Sir William, and I only wish that I deserved them.
Indeed you do.
Embarrassed and looking towards Darcy, who, with folded arms, is staring at the ceiling.
No, I do not. I did not like to speak of such a painful thing on an occasion like this, and so I have told no one of the fact that I am about to leave Netherfield.
Leave Netherfield? Oh.
no.
still more ill at ease.
Yes, it is a very sudden decision, but important interests have made it necessary for me to leave Netherfield.
But only for a time, Mr. Bingley. Let us hope it will only be a temporary separation.
Why, surely, Mr. Bingley, you will be back again very soon?
No. I am afraid my returning at all is extremely uncertain. In fact, I expect to leave Netherfield permanently.
Great consternation. Jane looks down. Elizabeth looks at Darcy. Miss Bingley has a triumphant smile.
Oh, my dear Mr. Bingley.
This is indeed a calamity.
To Elizabeth.
Good Lord, Lizzie! Poor Jane, what—
Oh, hush, mamma.
Looks again at Darcy, who remains perfectly calm throughout this commotion. This time the sight of him seems to make Bingley somewhat angry, and he pulls himself together and speaks in a firmer tone and in a more cheerful manner.
But my friends, nobody knows what may happen. We shall undoubtedly all meet again sometime, and meanwhile you must not let what I have said spoil your pleasure.
The music is now heard again in the ballroom.
There is the music. We must have another dance together.
There is a general movement among the guests. Those at the back of the room begin to go into the ballroom. To Jane, Colonel Forster, and others near him.
Let us make up a set here. I think there will be room.
Capital idea.
The footmen remove the tables.
Oh, yes, capital.
With meaning to Darcy.
Do not you think so, Mr. Darcy?
Darcy bows stiffly, without speaking.
Miss Bingley may have the pleasure.
She bows, looks daggers at Darcy, and takes her place in the dance. To Jane.
Miss Bennet, will you grant me the happiness?
Darcy gives him a look which Elizabeth sees.
The final happiness of my stay at Netherfield.
Curtsies, a tremor in her voice.
Thank you.
They begin to form a set with Miss Bingley and Colonel Forster, Lydia, and Denny. Crossing to Elizabeth.
May I have the honour, Miss Elizabeth?
Looking at him with frank hauteur.
Thank you, Mr. Darcy. I am indisposed.
Darcy bows, reddens, and crosses to the other side of the room. The music begins. Amid embarrassed astonishment, Sir William and Charlotte Lucas fill the quadrille set. As the dance commences, Elizabeth and Darcy, standing at either side of the dancers, exchange a glance of keenest pride and prejudice. End of Act 2.